All right, lights, camera,
Action!
Hi! Oh, that really hurt my ears. God, woman. Okay, guys, we're excited to be back. As always, we're going to start off the video just covering some of the vocab terms. You should follow along when we're going over them, and then we'll start going over the actual chapter itself. So right here, again, this top part right here is where you're going to see your vocab. So the first one is consent of the governed. The next one is Stamp Act. Then we got boycott, then repeal, then townshed duties, then a duty in general, then quarter, then Boston Tea Party, which is supposed to be Tea Party, people. We apologize. Then we got legislator. Then we got the First Continental Congress. Then we got patriots. Then we got Lexington and Concord. Then Second Continental Congress. Then delegates. Then grievance. Then unalienable rights. Then despotic. Then petition. Then patriot. Loyalist. Taxation without representation. Tyranny. Assent. Oppression. And self-evident.
How many times can you say the word then?
It was a mouthful, people. I apologize.
Okay, so this chapter turns out to be one of our favorites because it really gets into the 13 colonies saying we're declaring our independence. And, let's talk about some things that really pulled us towards that decision. And in that first big chunk, it says taxation without representation. You have to understand that with England being 3,000 or 4,000 miles away across the Atlantic, these colonists were really aggravated that a king and a parliament across the water was basically going to be making decisions for them. That's as though, let me give you an example. If Woodlawn Middle School was making classroom decisions or school decisions for Holly Navarre Middle School, they're not at our school. They don't have a clue what our environment is like. So it would be very difficult for them to make decisions for us.
And I'll even add on that, obviously taxation without representation is not listening to the colonists. So it would be like them not even listening to us over, again, like the example you said, it was Woodlawn. It'd be like them not even listening to us, not letting us have an actual say in it.
Correct.
Which is what was going on, exactly. So consent of the governed, guys, right here, this goes along with what we were just talking about. That's the approval of the people. So again, they were not seeking the consent of the governed for the colonists. They were doing what they wanted, and they were not listening to those people about taxes, which really infuriated them.
Exactly. And when it comes to taxes, the king really had built up this huge war debt and needed it paid off. So he started looking at the colonists as a cash cow. In other words, I can tax them, bring that money back home, and help pay off my war debt. So Stamp Act was actually one of the first ones where they basically taxed all the paper products for the colonists. And they're like, what?
And you have to remember, this is a different time period. There's no internet this time. Everything uses paper. So that was a huge, huge expenditure.
Oh, good point. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Now the colonists, they wanted to respond to this in I guess in a good way. I don't know what the right term is, in a constructive way, however you want to phrase it. But first they sent a petition, which is just a formal request. It's kind of like where people get signatures saying, we don't agree with this, and a bunch of people sign it. That's what a petition is. Now, they also ended up boycotting, which basically means they refused to buy these goods, which again were goods with paper, which is a huge amount of products at the time. And that really hurt businesses who were selling paper.
Right. The colonists had to do whatever they could, what little they could in their power to basically let the king know that they didn't approve it. And of course, if the king was not responding to the petitions, well, we'll hit him in the pocketbook by not purchasing his goods.
Exactly. And then there were some people, and this is where it gets really interesting in my opinion, there were some people that actually got tarred and feathered, meaning that they found tax collectors, people who were going to collect that money on those taxes. They I don't want to say kidnapped, but they took them, and they basically would pour hot tar on them, and then they would place feathers on them. That way everybody would know who they are, and it would leave these people in a ton of pain.
I don't see how they even survived. I'd be interested in looking some of that up.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Maybe try to post a video explaining that. Maybe on one of our PowerPoints.
Well, and again, the colonists let the king know. They would basically air their anger, let them know, hey, we don't like this. But there were other things that the colonists didn't like. Like, for instance, they would say, hey, we don't like this tax. They would protest, or they would turn around and boycott purchasing the goods. And so what would happen was the king would say, okay, repeal that, cancel that tax. But then they'd turn around and do another tax. Okay. Now, eventually there was something called the townshend duties. Duties, remember, when we're talking back in the colonies, we're talking about taxes. So that was basically where they kind of expanded on the Stamp Act. They said, okay, we won't just tax paper. We're going to tax paint, glass, lead, and tea. So it's like, whoa, now they're really going to expand that. It's almost like the ha, 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 don't complain, or you're going to hate what's coming at you, right?
Yeah, and you got to think about it from the colonist perspective. They're like, okay, they think, we've won. The king's gonna not tax us anymore. And then the king slaps that sucker down, and all of a sudden it's so much worse than the one was before. He taxed all of these new products.
Exactly. And just imagine this. Just imagine somebody telling you that you had to allow British troops to come and sleep in your home and eat your food. That was what was called the Quartering Act.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the king had British troops here to try to keep the colonists calm, and they wanted to keep England in control. And eventually, they said, well, we've got to kind of house our troops, so they kind of put that on the colonists as well. Not a good idea.
No, that infuriated, because some of these people that they had to feed and they had to house, they didn't have money to house these people. So again, they were going into debt as a result of what the king was doing. And it was really hurting them financially, so it really upset quite a few people.
Now keep in mind, tea, huge thing in Britain, okay? So the first thing that the colonists are going to be irritated at is knowing that you're going to tax their tea. Eventually, after so many years, because this didn't just happen overnight. This happened for several years, one thing after another. And it basically boiled down to the colonists decided they were going to protest. And this specific protest, they kind of dressed up in costumes, and they went on a couple of the ships, and they threw over British tea.
Mm-hmm.
And they dumped it into the harbor. This was known as the Boston Tea Party. Yeah. Did not make the king or the governor of Massachusetts very happy at all.
Now, as we've learned about, the king he's ticked. He's got a response to this too. And what he did is he passed what is known as the Intolerable Acts. So the Intolerable Acts, they did a couple things. First of all, they closed the Boston Harbor, and they suspended the legislature, which again, as we learned about in Chapter 1, was the lawmaking body. So again, no longer could they do that. Again, and in addition to that, the British government assumed the power to appoint all officials living in that region. So this really ticked off the colonists, just as everything else that the king had done.
Right. So if you notice, the things that they did above the Intolerable Acts, those were taxes. Now with the Intolerable Acts, those were things that were just going to get under the colonists' skin. Mm-hmm. Like they would do things, if they were going to have meetings, they would make the meetings at odd times and in odd locations, just making it difficult for colonists to even participate. So a big issue. So eventually you have this rumbling of irritation. And at what point is it going to blow? Now, let's move on to the First Continental Congress meeting. Now, this is where you ended up having, out of the 13 colonies, you had 12 colonies send representatives. They met, and the goal of the First Continental Congress meeting was to actually go through and come up with a response to the king. Mm-hmm. And they said, what can we do to try to ease this? So here is where they basically talked about how, if we protest, let's send a letter to the king. and let him know, that we don't like this, and would you please respect our wishes? And that didn't necessarily happen.
No, it didn't, and the king did not respond to this well. There's actually stories of him refusing to actually open the letter. He didn't care about it. But I want to make this, and this is something that a lot of students get confused with. The First Continental Congress, that was not about separation. As Ms. Hall already pointed out, that was is there a way to fix what's going on while remaining loyal to Britain? Because again, they considered themselves citizens of that country. They were not their own citizens at this point yet, for the most part.
Right. Correct.
So, okay. Now, right here, we're moving on next. The British colonists met outside of Lexington and Concord, and this is known as the shot heard around the world. So, again, this is the first part of the American Revolution.
Now, keep in mind, at this point, your Second Continental Congress meeting was about to happen because things were getting heated. The king wasn't responding to them. He was basically ignoring them. Mm-hmm. The colonists, when I say them. But when the two groups met at Lexington and Concord, they really don't know who technically started the war. No. They don't know which side actually shot first. Mm-hmm. But at that point, the war's on. Now, let's kind of move down. Now, if you do you want to
go to the Second Continental Congress right here?
No, let's just go ahead and go down. Yeah, not that second. Go on down to the next Second Continental Congress.
Gotcha.
Down here. Sorry. Now, the Second Continental Congress meeting, this one was where they were finally saying, okay, enough's enough. Now let's talk about whether we're going to go for independence, okay? And so you actually had some people debating, and John Adams was one of those that really led the whole thing of let's go for independence. And then you had one guy named Richard Henry Lee who actually wrote up the resolution and said, let's go for independence, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, they went ahead and decided, okay, let's go ahead. So, again, let me just go back. First Continental Congress meeting was solely about how are we going to respond to England. It had really nothing to do with independence. Your Second Continental Congress meeting had to do with let's write the Declaration of Independence. Okay?
Exactly right. Now, I would add to that just a little bit the fact that in order to do this, they really wanted support from all the colonies, not just one or two colonies. So delegates from all over all the 13 colonies were sent up here. And most of them supported this idea at this point. The vast majority did. So again, they wanted support from everywhere, and they wanted most people to feel like that, which they did. You want to have anything to add to that?
No, I agree.
Okay, good. So really quick, let's move on down to here, guys, the Declaration of Independence itself being written. Now, as I said in the previous video from Chapter 1, this is really a breakup text at its heart. And it's not only that, it's the greatest breakup text in human history. They did not just say, you know what, we're separating and that's that. They went into specific details on everything the king did up to that point, why they were separating, why they had just cause, and we're about to break into it. But that's really what the Declaration of Independence is.
Right.
Okay.
So we go into the breakdown of it. Now, the first paragraph is basically stating, hey, this breakup is necessary. We have to do it. Mm-hmm. Then it kind of folds into the whole concept of what your government should be. What are the beliefs? And that's when they get into life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Keep in mind, John Locke believed in life, liberty, property, but when Thomas Jefferson was writing this document, he changed that term property to pursuit of happiness.
Excellent. Now, the third part right here that you guys are going to see, the third thing in this document, is they were saying that this should not be an easy decision to separate from your government. This should only come when the government has become despotic, which if you guys look right here, it means the government's become oppressive and dictatorial. Did I say that right?
Dictatorial.
There you go. Thank you. Yes. And that's basically saying, again, if the government becomes that way, then the people clearly have a right to change it.
Right. And then, of course, the best part of the document are the grievances. Grievance is another word for complaint.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did was they just listed one after another of everything that they disagreed in regards to the king. So that's pretty interesting when we get into those.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't mind, I'll jump in right here. The last part right here, and this is probably 4 is one of my favorites. 5 is also my favorite because they want to say, you know what? We've had these disagreements, but we've done our part on the issue. We've tried to work this sucker out, and you are just not being reasonable.
Exactly.
So again, it's really you think about it, it's a complete work of the breakup. They're going, you know what? We're in the right here, and you're in the wrong.
Exactly. So this letter is a wave to all the other countries saying, hey, look at us. We're now a country. Who's going to be our allies? If you're our allies, that's great. That means you're our friends. If you're not, you're our enemies.
Mm-hmm. And what's so cool about this, guys, there have been countries who have almost copied our Declaration of Independence because it is so well written and it is almost unprecedented for any other document in human history. Nothing like this had ever seen before, and frankly, nothing's probably been written this well after. It's a really spectacular document defining, again, all the reasons that we were going to separate from them.
Right. Now, at the bottom, we just have a few additional terms because, you're going to run across these words well more than once throughout the school year. And petition, like we said, was formal request. A loyalist is someone who would basically be loyal to the king, wasn't really interested in breaking free from England.
They were remaining loyal.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Tax, that's a money charge on something like when you go and buy a candy bar or a beanie hat that's way too tight, like Alpin did.
Oh,
you have to pay. It may say $1.
See what she does.
It may say $1, but there's going to be $1 plus the little 7.5-cent tax that you have to pay, whatever our tax is now. Taxation without representation. That was the terminology that was thrown around all the time. You can't tax us without representing us. If you don't let us have some input, you shouldn't be able to tax us. Tyranny, love that word, abuse of power. Assent means to agree. Oppression basically means to oppress, means to kind of keep me down, keep the man down, not letting them have fair treatment. And then self-evident, no need to be given an explanation.
Exactly.
As you'll see that term in the document. Okay?
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you on our next video.
Awesome. Bye.